All right, so what happens if through capitalism, in a capitalist system, you have sorry, my screen is low. I'm making sure it's working right. You have a company that does so good that they put all their competitors out of business. So like Alice and I were saying earlier, the brewer's goal is to become the one brewer in town and everybody gets their beer from the brewer. So if that happens, what do you have? What's that called when one person or one company controls all of the resources? If you looked ahead in your notes, you know already, or it's a monopoly. We used to play Monopoly in here for a class period and just see how we do it on like block day and see just how things went and stuff. How many of you have played Monopoly before? Good, good. So what's the goal, McCoy? What's the goal of Monopoly? To make everybody else go broke. Yeah, get all the to own everything, make everybody else go bankrupt, and yeah, that's how you win. Monopoly was actually created by a woman who wanted to show the evils of capitalism. Like, here's the greed. Like you're trying to win and have it all, and put everybody else in the poorhouse. So that's a monopoly, and there's a link there to an article in your notes about the pros and cons and history of monopolies. And we've had several of them. I'm going to let you look at that on your own. But we've had several monopolies in the United States that have been busted up by the U.S. government. So that's been a case where the U.S. government has come in and, unlike what Adam Smith says with capitalism, they just say, well, we need to get involved. We need to have some government involvement in here and do something about this monopoly because it's not good for the consumer. There's no competition. Like recently, there's been a case with AT&T, the telecommunications company. Back before that, Standard Oil controlled a huge amount of the oil industry. And so if you're a monopoly, you're the only business in town. What can you then do to your prices? You can make people pay whatever you want. And so the U.S. government stepped in and said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. Yeah, that's a free market, but that's not really good for our consumers. So we have a policy of not really allowing industries to develop monopolies. And because we do that, because the government does sometimes step in the United States to intervene, we're technically a mixed economy. Now, we have a lot of market principles, a lot of free market principles, capitalist principles, but really the United States and most economies in the world are probably mixed economies. So there's elements of both a market and a planned economy in there. And there below it says it's needed because a free market economy does not meet all the needs of a society. It's like we talked about with the monopoly. That can sometimes people have decided, well, that may be not the best thing for people if they can't afford to buy any gas. That could be bad. Governments check greed, corruption, threats to private property, and price fixing and other aspects of market economies that may not be good for society as a whole. So a lot of economists and a lot of people in the world have decided that you do need a little bit of government intervention here and there to try to protect different people groups, protect consumers and workers and that sort of thing. Because and this was a big thing in the United States for a long, long time, and like we celebrated Labor Day a few months, 1 month ago. A lot of those laws come out of government intervention. If you are a capitalist industry in a free market economy and you want to make a profit, you want to pay your workers. I mean, it's your incentive, right, to pay your workers as little as possible and still make a profit, right? Now, those workers in a market economy could go out and work somewhere else if they could find another job. But that's not always a possibility, especially if you kind of have a monopoly on the labor force in a place. So the government has stepped in with different laws. What's a law that makes it so you can not be paid lower than a certain amount? Minimum wage. So they already have, that's called a price floor. You can't pay people lower than a certain amount. There's laws on how many hours you can work, laws on safety and that sort of thing, overtime pay. So we've seen the government come in and intervene quite a bit in the U.S. economy. So some of those interventions, you just mentioned it, minimum wage. That's what's known as a price floor. We'll talk about those a little bit, but the lowest legal wage that can be paid to workers. So, there's also discrimination guidelines, equal pay for equal work, things like that. So there's been a lot of laws that have been passed to help workers, protect them from being exploited, things that Karl Marx complained about back in the 1800s have kind of been corrected within a capitalist system. And price ceilings and price floors are used a lot in this country. So this is what they are. Usually it's a government, but it might be some sort of other group or entity that puts in a price floor. But a price ceiling is the limited maximum, and the floor would be the limited or the minimum limit to the price at which an item may be purchased. So the forced price must be below the equilibrium price ceiling or above it. So what that means is, like, you have your supply-demand curve, and you have the equilibrium price where supply meets demand. People might be willing to pay $100 a gallon for gas, but the government might step in and put a price ceiling on it and say, no, you can't sell gas for that much. That's not fair to a lot of people. You need to lower your price to whatever, $2 a gallon or whatever. And that's happened in history different times. Right now, you see it sometimes a lot with crops. They will put in price ceilings or floors on the price of corn or that sort of thing to protect farmers. Sometimes they'll put in a price floor, like wheat's not going to be sold for lower than whatever a bushel. That way farmers don't go out of business. Because you kind of want to keep farmers in business. They're the ones making the food for the country. So sometimes the government will step in and regulate stuff like that. In cities, you see price ceilings and floors for rents a lot of times. It's called rent control. Like, we're not going to rent below this certain price. We're not going to rent above this certain price. We want people to be able to afford a place to live. So you can't rent, you can't charge above this amount for rent per month. So those are some good examples of that. We are almost done. So I just give you a few examples there: rent control, crop protection, minimum wage. Anything else you can think of as price ceilings or price floors? I already gave you the stuff I know off the top of my head. Probably more out there, but. Oh yeah, like a salary cap. Yeah, that's a good example. I didn't even thought of that one. But yeah, like in I think most of the sports leagues have some sort of salary cap or another. Like, you can't pay people above a certain amount. Yeah, that would be a price. And they also have a minimum wage in the NBA and the NFL and stuff. So yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so for all these things, quick review. Hopefully you have a real world example for this stuff. Give me a real world example of a traditional economy. Or one from a movie we watched. Moana. Yeah, like ancient, Polynesian civilizations. Modern ones. There's still Inuit people up in Canada that live this way. Amazon indigenous people groups, that sort of thing. Market economy. What's an example of market economy? America, United States. Also the black market. It's probably the best example of a market economy out there. What about a command economy? What, Jacob? Yeah, so what is a country where that happens? Yeah, that's where decisions are made by the government. What's a country that does that? Kim Jong-un is in charge. North Korea is a good example. The former Soviet Union is a good example. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The mixed economy, again, the United States and a bunch of other places. You got aspects of both. You got some government intervention and you got some free market stuff in the mixed economy. So a lot of places are like that. Capitalist countries, again, the United States. What about socialist countries? Sweden, Venezuela. Uh, Quite a few in Europe are probably more socialist than what the United States is. So you can make an argument for like Norway, Denmark, places like that. What's an example of a monopoly? Yeah. What? Amazon is, Amazon probably isn't yet, but it'll be interesting to see if the government ever does intervene a little bit. With, because they have their competitors, right? Like Walmart's a competitor. They sell so much that like they have tons of competitors, really, but they are putting a lot of people maybe out of business. So, um, yeah, right now, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Amazon long term. But right now, they're probably not really a monopoly yet. They do, yeah. They have like third-party vendors that sell through there, so it's a little bit, yeah, it's a little bit different. Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know that either. Yeah. Okay. Well, past examples like Standard Oil Company, AT&T, Microsoft. Microsoft actually had some anti-monopoly legislation passed against them. What's called antitrust legislation. Okay. For these people, we're going to do our superhero economist presentations in a little bit. But in your notes here, and I'm not going to talk about each one, but you already have written up little paragraphs about each one. I want you to be able to go through and take, and we'll kind of do these together in class as you present, but go through and get enough from each person, especially things that make them, set them apart from other people. So like David Ricardo, his big thing is free trade. Thomas Malthus, his big thing was like population growth and scarcity, really, and that eventually population have to kind of balance out because of scarcity. Joseph Stiglitz, his big thing was asymmetric information. Friedrich Hayek, he talks about, he's kind of like Adam Smith. He talks about how the market has kind of like the invisible hand that controls prices and that sort of thing. But he also says the government can affect that a lot. So he says, yeah, we want a market system, but we want a little bit of government intervention, and that's going to influence places like the United States. His is like the Goldilocks government. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Janet Yellen, first ever chairwoman of the Federal Reserve. Arthur Laffer, his big thing is the Laffer curve. He said you can actually make money on taxes by lowering taxes. It's an interesting theory, and it's kind of disputed by different people. But the idea is that if you tax less, that generates more money out there for people to spend, and that money isn't taxed, and businesses are taxed, and they might hire more employees, and so overall that might lead you to more tax revenue. Thomas Sowell was a Marxist, but then he kind of changed his mind and became more of a capitalist, more of a free market advocate. Daniel Kahneman is a behavioral economist, whatever. So know a little bit about these people. You can write this stuff in your notes. We're going to take some notes on them as we do our superhero economist presentations now. And I'm going to stop my recording, and those people will have their notes. Maybe. I'm trying to stop my recording.